The smell hit Marcus Williams first. Fresh bread. Garlic. The kind of scent that made people stop mid-stride and follow their noses. He stood outside the glass doors of Bella Notte, one of Seattle's most talked-about Italian restaurants, his worn military jacket hanging loose on his frame. His beard was unkempt, his jeans stained with dirt from another night spent on a park bench. Inside, the restaurant glowed with warm amber lighting. White tablecloths. Crystal wine glasses. Laughter floating through the air like music. Marcus watched a couple toast each other, their smiles bright and oblivious to the world outside those doors. He reached into his pocket and pulled out a crumpled $20 bill. It was all he had. But tonight, he wasn't here to beg. He was here to eat. Like a human being. Like he used to. Taking a deep breath, Marcus pushed open the door and stepped inside. The hostess looked up from her podium, her smile freezing mid-formation. Her eyes traveled from his face to his jacket, down to his scuffed boots, and back up again. The smile didn't return. "Can I help you?" she asked, her tone careful, like she was addressing a stray dog. "Table for one," Marcus said quietly. His voice was steady, but his hands betrayed him, trembling slightly as he clutched the 20. The hostess glanced toward the dining room, then back at him. "I'm sorry, sir, but we're fully booked tonight." Marcus looked past her. At least 6 empty tables sat waiting, their candles unlit. He'd seen this before. He knew how this worked. "Stay with me until the end, because what happens next will remind you that respect isn't something you earn, it's something everyone deserves. And if you love stories where the underestimated rise above, hit that subscribe button now." Marcus Williams hadn't always been invisible. There was a time when people saluted him, when his uniform commanded respect, when the word, sir, wasn't said with pity but with honor. 10 years ago, he'd been Captain Marcus Williams, U.S. Army Rangers. 2 tours in Afghanistan. A Bronze Star. A life built on discipline, duty, and the belief that service mattered. But that was before the IED that took his leg. Before the phantom pains that kept him awake at night. Before the PTSD that turned everyday sounds, car backfires, slamming doors, into triggers that sent him spiraling back to Kandahar. The VA tried. The medications helped, sometimes. But the nightmares never stopped. And when his marriage crumbled under the weight of his silence, when his ex-wife took their daughter and moved to Boston, Marcus found himself alone in a city that suddenly felt too big and too small at the same time. He lost his job first. Then his apartment. Then, slowly, piece by piece, his dignity. Now, at 42, Marcus lived in the margins. A shelter on good nights. A park bench on bad ones. His prosthetic leg, the one the army had given him, had broken 2 months ago, and he couldn't afford to fix it. So he limped. And people looked away. But Marcus had a secret. One that no one on these streets knew. One that even he sometimes forgot when the hunger gnawed at his stomach and the cold seeped into his bones. Before the war, Marcus had been a dreamer. He'd grown up in his grandmother's kitchen in South Seattle, learning to make pasta from scratch, watching her hands move with the kind of grace that only came from a lifetime of practice. When he came back from his first tour, he used his savings to open a small Italian bistro. Just one location. Humble. Honest food. It was called Bella Notte. And it had taken off. Within 5 years, Marcus had expanded to 3 locations. Then 5. Then 10. By the time he deployed for his second tour, Bella Notte was a small empire, and Marcus had handed the reins to a management company to run it while he served. But when he came back broken, when the PTSD made it impossible to sit in a restaurant without scanning for exits, when the crowds became too much and the noise too loud, Marcus had walked away. He'd signed over operational control to the management firm, keeping only a silent ownership stake. The quarterly checks went to a trust. He didn't touch them. Didn't want to. Because how could he take money from a life he no longer recognized as his own? So he disappeared. Into the streets. Into anonymity. Into the kind of poverty that made people like the hostess at Bella Notte look right through him. "Sir," the hostess said again, her voice a little firmer now. "As I said, we're fully booked." Marcus didn't move. His eyes stayed on the empty tables. "I can wait," he said quietly. "I don't mind waiting." The hostess shifted uncomfortably. She glanced toward the back of the restaurant, where a tall man in a crisp black suit was approaching. His stride was confident, his expression cold. Derek Chen, the restaurant's manager, had worked at Bella Notte for 3 years. He prided himself on running a premium establishment. That meant no crying babies, no loud groups, and certainly no homeless people. "Is there a problem?" Derek asked, his voice clipped. The hostess stepped aside, relieved. "This gentleman is asking for a table, but we're fully booked," Derek interrupted smoothly. He turned to Marcus, his smile polite but his eyes hard. "I'm sorry, sir, but perhaps you'd be more comfortable at one of the diners down the street. We're a bit upscale for walk-ins." Marcus met his gaze. He saw it clearly, the judgment, the dismissal, the way Derek's nose wrinkled just slightly, as though Marcus carried a smell that might contaminate the polished floors. "I have money," Marcus said, holding up the 20. Derek's smile didn't waver. "I'm sure you do. But as I said, we're fully booked. Have a good evening." He turned to walk away, but Marcus's voice stopped him. "There are 6 empty tables." Derek paused. Turned back slowly. His smile was gone now. "Those tables are reserved." "For who?" "That's not your concern." The dining room had gone quiet. Diners at nearby tables glanced over, their forks pausing mid-bite. A woman whispered something to her husband, who shook his head and looked away. Marcus felt the familiar weight settling over him. The weight of being seen as less. Of being a problem to be solved, not a person to be served. But tonight, something inside him refused to move. "I'm a veteran," Marcus said quietly. "I fought for this country. All I'm asking for is a meal." Derek's expression hardened. "And I respect your service. But this is a private business, and I have the right to refuse service to anyone. Now, if you don't leave voluntarily, I'll have to call security." Marcus's jaw tightened. His hands curled into fists at his sides, the $20 bill crumpling in his grip. He wanted to yell. To tell Derek who he was. To pull out his phone and make a single call that would end this man's career in seconds. But he didn't. Because part of him wanted to see how far this would go. How deep the cruelty ran. "Fine," Marcus said softly. He turned toward the door, his limp more pronounced now, his shoulders sagging. As he pushed the door open, he heard Derek's voice behind him, low but audible. "Get someone to sanitize that podium." Marcus stopped. His hand rested on the door handle, his back to the restaurant. For a long moment, he didn't move. Then, slowly, he pulled his phone from his jacket pocket and dialed a number he hadn't called in months. "Tom," Marcus said when the line connected. "It's Marcus. I need you to come to the Bella Notte on Pine Street. Bring the documents." He ended the call and slipped the phone back into his pocket. Then he turned around and walked back inside. Derek looked up, his expression shifting from irritation to alarm. "Sir, I told you." "I know what you told me," Marcus said calmly. "But I've changed my mind. I'm not leaving." Derek's face flushed red. Around them, diners had stopped pretending not to watch. The restaurant had gone silent except for the soft clinking of silverware and the low hum of the kitchen. "If you don't leave immediately," Derek said, his voice rising, "I will call the police." Marcus stood his ground. He didn't argue. Didn't raise his voice. He simply waited. The hostess looked between them, her hands wringing nervously. A waiter hovered nearby, unsure whether to intervene. Finally, Derek pulled out his phone and dialed. "Yes, I need police at Bella Notte on Pine Street," he said, his eyes locked on Marcus. "We have a vagrant refusing to leave the premises." Vagrant. The word hung in the air like a slap. Marcus felt the old anger stirring, the kind that used to get him into trouble before the army taught him discipline. But he kept his voice even. "You really want to do this?" Marcus asked. "You really want to make me?" Derek shot back. The minutes crawled by. Diners whispered. One couple asked for their check early and left, the woman casting a sympathetic glance at Marcus as she passed. Then the door opened, and two police officers stepped inside. The first officer, a middle-aged man with graying hair and a kind face, approached slowly. His partner, a younger woman, stayed near the door. "What's going on here?" the older officer asked. Derek stepped forward immediately. "This man is trespassing. I've asked him repeatedly to leave, but he's refused." The officer looked at Marcus, his eyes taking in the worn jacket, the limp, the tired lines on his face. "Sir," the officer said gently. "Is that true?" Marcus nodded. "I came in to order a meal. I have money. But I was told the restaurant was fully booked, even though there are empty tables." The officer glanced around the dining room, noting the vacant seats. "I see," he said carefully. He turned to Derek. "Is there a reason you can't seat this man?" Derek's jaw tightened. "As I told him, those tables are reserved." "Reserved for who?" "That's not." "For who?" the officer repeated, his tone firmer now. Derek hesitated. "Potential walk-ins." The younger officer raised an eyebrow. "So they're not actually reserved." "This is a premium establishment," Derek said, his voice defensive now. "We have the right to maintain a certain atmosphere." The older officer's expression hardened. "You're refusing service based on his appearance?" "I'm refusing service based on my discretion as manager." The room had gone completely silent now. Even the kitchen noise had dimmed. The officer turned to Marcus. "Sir, I understand this is frustrating, but technically, a private business does have the right to refuse service. If you'd like, I can help you find another." "That won't be necessary," a new voice said from the doorway. Everyone turned. A man in his late 50s stood at the entrance, dressed in a tailored gray suit. He carried a leather briefcase in one hand and an air of quiet authority that filled the room. Tom Rodriguez, Marcus's attorney and the executor of the Bella Notte Trust, stepped inside with the measured confidence of someone who knew exactly what he was doing. "Marcus," Tom said, his voice warm. "I'm glad you called." Derek's eyes narrowed. "Who are you?" Tom smiled, but it didn't reach his eyes. "I'm Tom Rodriguez, legal counsel for Bella Notte Holdings." "And you must be Derek Chen." Derek blinked. Yes. But I don't understand." "You're about to," Tom said. He opened his briefcase and pulled out a folder. "Officers, thank you for your time, but I believe this situation is about to resolve itself." The older officer frowned. "What's going on?" Tom turned to Marcus. "Would you like to explain, or should I?" Marcus looked at Derek, whose face had gone pale. "I'm Marcus Williams," Marcus said quietly. "I own Bella Notte. All 12 locations. Including this one." The silence that followed was deafening. Derek's mouth opened and closed soundlessly. Around them, diners stared, some leaning forward in their seats as though watching a play. That's impossible," Derek stammered. "The owner is some management company." "Bella Notte Holdings," Tom interrupted. "Which is wholly owned by Mr. Williams. He founded the company 14 years ago and has maintained majority ownership even after stepping back from day-to-day operations." He handed the folder to the older police officer, who opened it and scanned the documents inside. His eyebrows rose. Articles of incorporation. Ownership certificates. A notarized statement from the board of directors confirming Mr. Williams as the primary stakeholder. The officer looked up at Derek. "It's all here." Derek's face had gone from pale to ashen. He looked at Marcus, then at Tom, then back at Marcus. But you're homeless?" Marcus finished quietly. "Yeah. I am. Does that change who I am?" Derek's hands trembled. "I didn't know." "You didn't ask," Marcus said. His voice was calm, but there was steel beneath it. "You saw someone you thought was beneath you, and you treated him like garbage. Not because of anything I did. Because of how I looked." Tom stepped forward. "Mr. Chen, as of this moment, your employment with Bella Notte is terminated. You'll receive a formal letter within 24 hours outlining the terms of your dismissal. Security will escort you from the premises." "You can't do this," Derek said, his voice cracking. "I've worked here for 3 years. And in those 3 years," Tom said coldly, "how many other people did you turn away because they didn't meet your standards? How many customers did you judge before they even opened their mouths?" Derek said nothing. Marcus turned to the police officers. "Thank you for coming. I'm sorry for wasting your time." The older officer shook his head. "You didn't waste anything, sir." He extended his hand, and Marcus shook it. "Thank you for your service." As the officers left, Tom gestured to the hostess, who looked ready to faint. "Clear the best table in the house," Tom said. "Mr. Williams will be dining tonight. And his meal is on the house." 20 minutes later, Marcus sat at a corner table by the window, a white tablecloth stretched before him and a glass of red wine catching the candlelight. The staff moved around him carefully, their earlier dismissal replaced by nervous deference. The head chef himself brought out the first course, a simple caprese salad, the tomatoes so ripe they almost glowed. "This is the dish that started it all," Marcus said quietly to Tom, who sat across from him. "My grandmother's recipe." Tom smiled. "I remember. You made it for me the first time we met." Marcus took a bite, and for a moment, he was back in that tiny kitchen in South Seattle, his grandmother's hands guiding his as they sliced basil and drizzled olive oil. "Why did you come here tonight?" Tom asked after a while. Marcus set down his fork. "I wanted to see if it still felt like mine. But it doesn't. Not anymore." "Then why not sell it? Walk away clean?" Marcus shook his head. "Because it's not about the restaurant. It's about what it represents. My grandmother believed that food was love. That a meal wasn't just sustenance, it was dignity. Community. Respect." He paused. "But somewhere along the way, places like this forgot that. They started serving egos instead of people." Tom leaned back in his chair. "So what do you want to do?" Marcus was quiet for a long time. Then he said, "I want to fix it." The next morning, Marcus stood in the conference room of Bella Notte's corporate headquarters. He'd showered at a shelter, borrowed a suit from Tom, and shaved for the first time in months. Without the beard, he looked younger. Sharper. Like the man he used to be. Around the table sat the restaurant's management team, regional directors, HR representatives, and the company's acting CEO, a woman named Elena Martinez who had been running operations in Marcus's absence. Elena stood when he entered, her expression a mixture of shock and relief. "Marcus," she said. "It's been a long time." "Too long," Marcus agreed. He took his seat at the head of the table. "Thank you all for coming on short notice. I'll keep this brief." He looked around the room, meeting each person's gaze. "Last night, I was refused service at one of our own restaurants. Not because I was disruptive. Not because I couldn't pay. But because I looked like someone who didn't belong. The room shifted uncomfortably. That manager, Derek Chen, is no longer with the company. But he's not the problem. The problem is a culture that allowed someone like him to think that behavior was acceptable. And that's on me. Elena frowned. Marcus, you've been away for years. You can't blame yourself. I can, Marcus interrupted gently. Because I built this company on a promise. That Bella Notte would be a place where everyone was welcome. Where the food mattered more than the dress code. Where dignity wasn't reserved for people who could afford a $200 bottle of wine. He stood, pacing slowly. We've lost our way. And I want to bring us back. He laid out his plan. Mandatory training for all staff on implicit bias and customer service. A new policy that no one would be turned away based on appearance. A partnership with local veteran organizations to hire formerly homeless individuals and provide job training. And most radically, once a month, every Bella Notte location would host a community night, where meals would be free for anyone who needed them. That's going to cost us, one of the regional directors said carefully. I know, Marcus replied. And I don't care. We've made enough money. It's time we gave something back. Elena nodded slowly. I think it's a good idea, Marcus. But are you ready to come back? To really be here? Marcus hesitated. The truth was, he didn't know. The noise of a restaurant still made his hands shake. The crowd still felt like threats. But he was tired of running. Tired of being invisible. I'll try, he said finally. That's all I can promise. 3 weeks later, Marcus stood at the entrance of the Bella Notte on Pine Street, watching as people lined up outside. Some wore suits. Others wore jeans. A few carried backpacks and sleeping bags. Inside, the tables had been rearranged to seat more people. The staff, now trained and briefed, moved with quiet efficiency. There were no judgments. No questions. Just warm smiles and plates of food. Marcus spotted a young woman near the back, her eyes darting nervously around the room. She reminded him of himself, the way she held her shoulders, as though bracing for rejection. He walked over and sat down across from her. First time, he asked gently. She nodded, not meeting his eyes. It's okay, Marcus said. You belong here. She looked up then, her eyes shining. Thank you. As the evening went on, Marcus moved through the restaurant, stopping at tables, listening to stories. There was a man who'd lost his job and his apartment in the same week. A teenager who'd aged out of foster care. A veteran, like Marcus, whose PTSD made it hard to hold down work. Each person carried their own weight. Their own invisible battles. And for the first time in years, Marcus felt something shift inside him. Not healing, not yet. But hope. Near the end of the night, Tom appeared at his side. How are you holding up? Tom asked. Marcus smiled faintly. Better than I thought. Good. Because I have someone who wants to meet you. Tom led him to a corner table, where a young man in his early 20s sat with a shy smile. He had dark hair and kind eyes, and something about him felt familiar. Marcus, this is Jamie. He's been volunteering at the shelter where you've been staying. Jamie stood and extended his hand. Mr. Williams, it's an honor. I've heard so much about you. Marcus shook his hand, confused. I don't understand. Jamie's in culinary school, Tom explained. He wants to be a chef. When he heard about what you were doing here, he reached out. He wants to help. Marcus looked at Jamie, seeing the same hunger for purpose that he'd once felt. You don't need to call me Mr. Williams, Marcus said. Call me Marcus. And if you're serious about this, I'd be glad to have you. Jamie's smile widened. I'm serious. 6 months later, Bella Notte had changed. The community nights were packed every month, and other restaurants in Seattle had started similar programs. The staff turnover had dropped, and employee satisfaction had soared. Marcus still struggled. There were days when the nightmares kept him awake. Days when the weight of the past felt too heavy to carry. But he wasn't invisible anymore. He'd moved into a small apartment near the waterfront. He was back in therapy. And slowly, carefully, he was rebuilding a life that felt like his own. One evening, as Marcus stood in the kitchen of the Pine Street location, supervising the dinner rush, Jamie appeared at his side. "Chef," Jamie said, grinning. "Table 7 wants to compliment the pasta. Says it's the best they've ever had." Marcus smiled. "Tell them thank you. And tell them it's my grandmother's recipe." As Jamie hurried off, Marcus paused, his hands resting on the stainless steel counter. He thought about the night Derek had turned him away. About the moment he'd almost walked out and never come back. But he hadn't. And that had made all the difference. Outside the window, the city light sparkled against the darkening sky. Marcus watched them for a moment, then turned back to the kitchen. There was work to do. Meals to prepare. People to feed. And for the first time in years, Marcus Williams felt like he was home. That if this story moved you, hit that like button and subscribe for more stories about resilience, justice, and the power of second chances. Because everyone deserves respect. Everyone deserves dignity. And everyone deserves a seat at the table. Leave a comment below. Have you ever been judged unfairly? How did you handle it? Let's talk.